All right, I believe we have everyone here from InfoTrust. So I'm going to go ahead and start. Hello and welcome everyone to another InfoTrust Office Hours session, where we bring in experts at InfoTrust to help answer any questions you may have on a specific topic. Today, we'll be discussing the integration of Google Cloud Platform with Google Analytics and help you to understand how developers and businesses can conduct highly scalable and cost-effective interactive analysis through this integration. To help us with this understanding and to answer your questions are our experts today. We have, within Cincinnati, Ohio, we have Tyler Blatt, who is our lead analytics engineer and is also Google Cloud certified and a cloud architect. And we also have joining us today is Pam Cascone, who is our lead data science specialist and is Google Cloud certified and a data engineer. And David Eli, who is the head of discovery. And lastly, myself, Shasnika Dimel, I'm a discovery advanced analyst, and I'll be your moderator today. A little bit about us. InfoTrust is an end-to-end digital analytics consulting, data governance, and technology company, and we have a broad range of Google partner certifications, and we also work with some of the world's best-known brands. But more importantly, we are a human-to-human company, and we are really passionate about helping companies make better decisions through data. And especially in these uncertain times, we really want to help companies and people alike to navigate through these rough seas. And we've listed out below some of the key initiatives that we're working on, such as the donation campaign to provide masks to medical professionals through the InfoTrust Foundation, also providing resources for our clients that have leaner teams due to furloughs and layoffs. And we're also requesting leaders of tech companies to join our No Playoff Pledge. To learn more about these initiatives and more, please visit our website as well as follow us on LinkedIn. So to kick things off, Pam, our lead data scientist specialist, will be providing a 3-minute overview of Google Analytics 360 integration with the Google Cloud Platform, and she'll also talk about how to get things started. And after this, we will then open up to your questions, and I'll be moderating your questions and making sure that the right person within InfoTrust will be able to answer that. And again, once that's open, feel free to ask any questions you may have. You can do so within the chat panel. And with that, I am going to hand things over to you, Pam.
Great. Thank you, Shasnika. So before we dive into the open Q&A, that's really the purpose of this session, I did just want to start us off with a really quick overview of the topic today and why it's so important. So starting at a high level with Google Cloud Platform and why it is important to us as marketers. Google Cloud Platform is Google's suite of cloud computing products. And there are dozens really, of products within Google Cloud, ranging from compute, storage, networking capabilities, machine learning, and many others. But what you'll notice with our discussion today is that we'll be talking a lot about Google BigQuery, which is one of the storage solutions. And the reason we'll be talking about BigQuery so much is because of the native integration with Google Analytics 360. And so, what we see happen quite a bit with the partners we work with is that they get to a point in their analytics maturity where they have questions that they can't answer with Google Analytics alone. And so they get to a point where, maybe they want to start doing some modeling. They want to be more advanced when building their audiences. Basically, they just want to do things, move beyond the canned reports and the GA UI. And so through the native integration between Google Analytics and BigQuery, that is what we see as really a common path for starting with cloud. And so talking specifically about the integration, basically once you set it up, it gives you access to having your full hit level analytics data. So like I said, that's really what just gives you the capabilities for doing data science or other advanced applications. And then the second piece that's really powerful about it is when you have that full hit level data set, you can then integrate that with other sources. So our engineering team, for example, has done a number of projects regarding to like a single view of customer. But you get to that single view by integrating your analytics data with your other data sources, maybe like your CRM. So those are just a couple examples of the type of opportunities that are opened up once you get your analytics data into cloud. And then the last thing I'll touch on here really quickly is just if you don't already have the integration set up between Google Analytics and BigQuery, it's a 3-step process to get started. First, you go into Google Cloud and create a Google Cloud project. All the work you do within Google Cloud has to be tied to a project. So you go in there and you create a project and you enable the BigQuery API. Once you've got that set up, you go and configure the billing accounts and enable the data transfer. And then the final step is going into your Google Analytics UI and basically telling GA where to point your data to in Google Cloud. So that's all there is to it. That's all you need to get started. And so with that quick introduction, I'd like to go ahead and open the floor for questions.
Great, thank you, Pam. And while we are waiting for the questions to come in through, I perhaps may start with a few questions of my own as well. And just to get things started, one of the probably interesting things for most businesses and individuals to note is when you should use BigQuery versus other databases. And Tyler, perhaps this is a question for you. If you could just give us an understanding of when people can actually start thinking about using this.
So I'll back into this a little bit. When you first start thinking about analytics and databases together, you have to think about what is the platform solving for me. From an outside look, a database is a database, but there's a couple categories of thought when we go to look at how we're storing data. Number one, a lot of people think, how quickly can I access the data as it gets larger? Is it efficient? How cheap is it? And how readily available is it? So is this hard to work with? Can I get my data through? So the reasons you would want to pick BigQuery are, I have a large data set, like an analytical data set, as BigQuery excels at big queries, really large queries. It's faster and it's naturally threaded. So a BigQuery does well in BigQuery. So lots of complex data science like queries or things where you're spanning a large data set to make a dashboard. That's where BigQuery really shines. What BigQuery is, and I should also say it is cheap. BigQuery is an extremely cheap choice when storing large amounts of data. Now, what it is not is a transactional database. When you hear the word transactional, you tend to think transactional and the fact that your money transaction. But when we're talking about databases, what it means is it's something where you're often saying, find this row, give me this row, delete this row, update this row. You're sending a lot of these things back and forth. BigQuery, you're limited on the number of updates and deletes you can do a day. It's meant to be a data warehouse or a data lake, a big data aggregator where you get all of this data and then you prep it for some purpose or you're using it against some purpose, but it's not meant to run your application where you're deleting users and uploading users and going back and forth. So what it's really used for it's crawling data, and that's what it's specifically good at. Things that BigQuery does to make that better. So if you have something like, for example, the Google Analytics tables that Pam was talking about that come out every day, they're split into sets of every day. So your data is naturally, they call it sharding, and it's cutting the tables into shards so that across all of those tables, they're in nice little pieces. So if you only need to look at 7 days of data, you can actually isolate those 7 days. But if you need to look at all of the data, you can query them as one set. So with a period of those, sorry, I have a question coming in at the same time. More or less, I'll get this idea out basically through a series of using what's called multi-threading and letting multiple machines work together, and techniques like sharding the tables apart, it becomes effective for storing. We had a question come in chat. Now, while I can't answer this, I think I'll leave it up to the floor if somebody else wants to talk. How much does the data integration from GA360 to BigQuery cost?
I can chime in and provide some color on this. So the short answer is it depends. And so I can explain a little bit more about why it depends. But when it comes to BigQuery, you are charged for storage of your data as well as the processing. So the reason I say it depends is because it depends on how much data you have. So if we're talking about your website or app, how much data is actually being collected in that property. So that has an impact on both the processing as that data is coming into BigQuery, as well as on the long-term storage. And then another big factor, I guess 2 more big factors. Like I mentioned, you are paying for processing. So if you have a team of analysts who are in BigQuery, who are writing lots of queries, doing work, you do get charged for the amount of data that's being processed by those queries. And then the third thing that comes into consideration is how you configure the connection between Google Analytics 360 and BigQuery. You have 2 options for the speed at which the data is streamed into BigQuery. There's a standard option, which streams it in 3 times per day, or you can enable it to collect the data closer to real time. So if you upgrade to that more real-time data streaming, it does cost a little bit more to do that. But I know that's not a super specific answer. There are resources that can help you understand what your data costs might look like. There are calculators and other things you can use to help you get a feel for that if that's something that you need to work into budgets. So that's, we can follow up with a link to some of the billing information around BigQuery to help you get a feel for that for your specific website or app.
If I can piggyback off of that, I can tie that a little bit back into my answer as well. So like I said, there's many techniques into how they make it shorter. So when you write a query in BigQuery, it's actually doing some cool stuff behind the scenes that you don't really realize going on at an end user, but from a technical perspective is really nice. What they'll do is when you make a select or you're doing a query, you're sort of creating a virtual table in that query that you don't see on the front end but could exist somewhere else. So what happens when you create that is it'll actually cache off those results. So if someone were to query that again, you actually wouldn't be charged for that second query. The only way those tables can exist or those cache tables is if the original table isn't altered, because that immediately invalidates. If you add new rows, the cached off ones might need to include those new rows. So you actually drive drive prices down over time for tables you don't touch in BigQuery. Again, it's designed for large storage over time. So if you do that naturally, daily table sharding, over time, those daily tables that haven't been touched because that day's been closed for a year won't cost much, and people can query them freely as they want to because it's all been cached and it shouldn't charge you much. So when they have to do that large processing, when you're making, my joke about BigQuery, but big queries, and you have to create those caches, yes, it costs something up front, but over time, those tables that are unaffected and those caches that are allowed to remain, your query costs will naturally go down over time.
Great. Thank you for that, Tyler and Pam. And I hope we were able to answer, especially that question around data ingestion from GA360 to BigQuery and how much would that cost. Once again, feel free to ask us any follow-up questions you may have regarding that. And I think Tyler and Pam, you may have already covered this as well, but another question we had from Ferdinand is the connection from GA360 to BigQuery real time? And is there any things that users need to consider if it is in real time?
Sure, I can provide a little more detail there. So when you set up that connection between Google Analytics and BigQuery, you have two options for the streaming. So the faster option is called the streaming export, and that's the closest we can get to real time today. And so what they mean by streaming export is that the data flows into BigQuery about every 10 to 15 minutes. So this is a pretty substantial improvement over the default streaming, which just pipes it in 3 times per day. So, I will say the majority of the data is available through streaming every 10 to 15 minutes. There are a couple exceptions, corner cases that aren't available, but the vast majority of the fields that you are familiar seeing in the GA UI do become available within 10 to 15 minutes.
Perfect. Thanks, Pam. And while we're still waiting for some more questions, another question that I have here that is usually asked is, why does it make sense to store your analytics data in the cloud? And Tyler, perhaps this might be a question.
I can jump in, but we actually have some questions in the chat, and then I'll come back to that. Well, we have a question asking about data ingestion into BigQuery. It's called ingress and egress as far as data processing in and out of any cloud environment. Also, I'd like to say, I'm going to answer that, but we're focusing a lot on BigQuery, and that's a goal because it's an entry point for what we see a lot of people in the cloud. But if you have a more specific question that doesn't have to do with BigQuery, or you're feeling like, hey, I joined this, but this might be targeting me, feel free to throw it out. Like I am a certified Google Cloud architect. We have lots of experts across all of cloud for marketing, analytics, Google Cloud on this call. So if you have another question that you feel like this isn't representing you, feel free to put it in chat. We just want this to be an entry point for people that feel they need an entry point, but we can also, the office hours are for any and all questions. So what I was getting at is for the entire Google Cloud sphere, anything that's moving data in and out, whether it be BigQuery, another database, whether it's going to a specific server that you rented, you pay for data based off of ingress and egress charges based on the platform, ingress being coming in and egress going out. The rates for BigQuery are extremely low, like cents on huge volumes of data. I'm not exactly sure what the pricing is. Like Pam said, we can send out following up at the end the actual link to BigQuery pricing, but it's for extremely large amounts of data. It's very, very slow. The only real cost you would get, storage is never going to be a problem for most companies in cost, and BigQuery, as Pam was leading to, queryings where you'll see the real cost. If you have lots of teams running lots of complex, just crunching against data all the time, think about it as processing. Storing's fairly cheap. Storage is fairly cheap. They have this massive network. They're able to store it redundantly at extremely low cost. But because of that redundant storage, they're able to hit it with a lot of processing. With data processing expensive, running a processor around the clock to solve problems and long queries is where you'll really get into the expense. So not that I ever think it's comparing to other services, I think it's always a really, really frugal alternative. But yeah, the querying is more where you would get hit on that kind of thing. There's a question from somebody about coming up with web plus app. I don't know that I'm the one to answer this, but I'll throw it out there and see if somebody wants to answer this. He says, with the coming of web plus app properties, which have a native integration with BigQuery, assuming in the free version I hear with GA360, what will the remaining benefit be other than having the integration with DoubleClick, etc.? So he's looking to see what the change of app plus web, what's the reason to I'm guessing the benefit into BigQuery, but maybe it's the benefit to 360, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I think I would maybe just ask a clarification there. So are you asking, Jonathan, what is the benefit to web Atlas Web?
He has, if you want to pull up the question and answer, Pam, he has another response to that, and I can move on to it. There's another question, and you can read that and come back to it. Someone asked if all data flows into BigQuery in different tables based off days, how do you get data for a year in one table? Don't think of the daily the sharding as different tables. They all actually match the same schema. So in the BigQuery world, you have what's called an account, which is you're logging into the interface. It's the highest level in which you can log in. And then within that account, you can create what's called multiple data sets. And inside that data set, you can have tables that match a schema. So a data set, you can think of the traditional create DB, it's my database. And within this database, we're going to have tables, and those tables will conform to a schema. Within that structure of those tables, you're basically going to have, if at the end of that table you put underscore and a date format, then it will naturally link all those tables together and understand that you have put them in an indexed date format. If any and all of that was confusing, basically how you would access all the dates, if you wanted to get all the dates, you would say table date format instead of underscore date, you would put underscore star, and that just gets all the tables. There's also a table date range function, so you can get from that table, I have this range of dates, and then any and all, you can mix them. There's basically functionality from selecting individual dates from that. And when you type through those functions, there's actually like a query language for SQL that's very similar to MySQL or traditional SQL, but it has some functions like that built in for dealing with their own system. It'll allow you to basically treat all of those different date tables as a single table. And when that happens, the cache conversation from earlier, so now there exists that table join that you've created across those, and it'll be cheaper to query in the future.
So if that's kind of wraps up your answer there, Tyler, I do want to circle back to Jonathan's question, and thank you, Jonathan, for providing some clarification here. So really what he's asking is, if the new free version of GA, meaning Atlas Web, comes with BigQuery as part of just a standard integration, what's keeping me on GA 360, which, as you all probably know, is a paid product, other than the double-click integrations? So it is a good question. So with GA 360, other than the integrations with DoubleClick and Google Analytics, or excuse me, and BigQuery, there are some other GA 360 only features. So first of all, and then kind of maybe as a side note, depending on the hit volume that your website or app has, you may be forced into upgrading to GA 360 just because there are limits to the free product. But there are additional integrations and just some additional capabilities and things that you can access through the UI. But I know that's kind of vague. The other thing I do want to circle around to here is bearing in mind that App plus Web and the tracking model that is moving to, at least from the conversations that I've heard, that is the future of analytics. You know, it's still as a product being built out, but I think, and we've seen other analytics products on the market moving to this type of tracking model. It seems like that's the way the industry is going. So I think it's just a matter of time. And App plus Web just has some catching up to do in terms of the capabilities. I don't know if anybody else wanted to add anything to that, but
yeah, I would say if you're looking at the current state of what is the analytics market, where you've kind of seen Heap and other event-based tracking come on, I could see where people are starting to lean towards that. And if you look at the old market, which is what is traditional analytics, you would say, okay, getting into BigQuery is a big deal, but also how many hits per session before my session no longer has hits? What is my sampling rate? How am I connecting to marketing things? I mean, there's a lot of advantages to 360, but BigQuery was a large one. Moving to App Plus Web, in order for it to work, there's no way that you wouldn't want access to that being stored in something. So they kind of have to have BigQuery free with App Plus Web when you're doing the concept of we're aggregating now on an event-based analytics system and you lay your models onto it. When the market was asking for analytics, when Google Analytics was created, people did not have the data science teams, the ETL pipelines, the systems set up to build out data warehouses and start consuming their own models. That's becoming much more normal in today. So I don't even think we'll see as an industry Google Analytics completely leaving, because not every company's to that point yet. And that's the only time I think you should be looking at those analytics platforms. But if you do have the team to create your own models, to figure out how you want to do your own custom media platform and figure out how to consume this, then I think those make sense, and you kind of have to have that data in BigQuery, which is why I'm leaning on BigQuery being a good place to even get people start putting your analytics data in there, start building the data warehouse and getting everything that you have in your entire marketing world in one place so you can start laying these things on top. And that's really why the move to App Plus Web has to go to BigQuery. There's no real analytics happening without your ability to get into that actual data.
So I see your follow-up here, Jonathan. From what I have seen so far, if you are using App Plus Web and connecting that to BigQuery, it is a separate link. So what I see happening is that they'll continue to be separate. So if you did have an App Plus Web property, you would connect that to a different, set up a new data set in BigQuery to pipe in your App Plus Web data. The schemas of those tables are different. So I see those being two, separate connections.
Okay.
I can take this last one that I see here about OData.
Okay.
If that's cool. So real quick, Jonathan, OData is, as far as I know, it's not natively supported by BigQuery. However, since you're doing the SAP Commerce Platform, they do provide an OData connector, which they're wrapping around and pumping the data into BigQuery for you. So I think that's probably your simplest solution. However, I don't know SAP Commerce Platform to know whether or not they're going to charge you for that OData connector. So what I would do is I would look to see if there's any additional charges that go with that. And if there are, I would look into other options of pushing your data into BigQuery and just do a apples to apples comparison of what your options are.
Thanks, David. We also have another question coming through from Ankur. And his question is, what are some of the cool use cases that we could try out with GA plus BigQuery and maybe auto machine learning, auto ML?
Sure, I can definitely start this one, but I know, Tyler, you have lots of ideas too. So really, you have so many things that you can do when you have access to the full hit level data set. So when it comes to thinking about auto ML specifically, we see a lot of propensity type models. And what I mean by that is building a model to predict which users are going to do something, complete some sort of conversion, whether that's completing a purchase, signing up to be, registering as a user, any of those models that are trying to predict what's usually like a binary yes/no outcome. We see a lot of that being done. Other things you can do once you have this integration set up that you cannot do in GA. If you're familiar with how Google Analytics handles attribution, and so what I mean by that is how conversions are credited to different marketing channels. The vast majority of Google Analytics reports use the last non-direct click attribution model. And basically you as an end user can't do anything about it. There are some other reports that allow you to overlay different attribution models, but for the vast majority of the reports you see in GA, it's last non-direct click. That's how all of your revenue and orders are attributed, and you kind of just have to live with it. Once you have your data in BigQuery, you are no longer bound to the last non-direct click attribution model. So you can build your own custom models. You can, if there's a different model that works better for your business, you can write the logic to use that model instead. So that's another interesting use case. I mean, I could continue to pull out other things, but maybe I'll just pull out one more and then I'll pass it to Tyler if he has any others. But one pain point that I've especially had trying to analyze data in GA is that, in my opinion, trying to do any sort of pathing analysis is really painful with the out-of-the-box reports in GA because they're trying to do too much at once, and it's really hard to understand what's going on. But when you have the full hit level data set, you can do any type of pathing or analysis to understand how people are moving sequentially through your website or app. I just saw your comment there. Yes, the GA reports are terrible. So there's actually a field in the schema for hit number. So that allows you to sequence hits as they're being collected across the sessions. And so you can do any type of analysis there. So those are the three examples that are top of mind for me. Tyler or Shaz, David, do you have any others you want to add?
When we're talking about AutoML, there's really kind of two sections of AutoML. There's AutoML in the traditional machine learning sense that I have some sort of pattern and I want to model against it. And I don't know that I would give any better use cases than what Pam just described as far as using AutoML for Google Analytics. But as far as in the marketing sphere, I think some of the tools that they have within the AutoML sphere, as far as the vision APIs, the natural language APIs, there is such depth to what you could do with that. I mean, well-performing visual ads, running it through AutoML Vision and finding out what's working with your ads. I don't see a lot of people doing that, and I think it's super powerful. With the natural language API, they give you a sentiment analysis, so how you're coming across, what is your language doing with customers. Running that through on platforms like Facebook, where you have literal posts that are interfacing with people, and you're able to look at how are my best posts being perceived, and how do I change other posts to work like that. Not necessarily analytics, but closely related to analytics with marketing. It goes deeper and deeper the more that you start pulling things in and looking at just the ability to, with both images and video and language, break down how all of your creatives or your things that are driving to your website are being perceived by the market, classify them and improve them, I think is such a strong area. And that all of that data is linked back to analytics. So you could even have similar things where you pass custom dimensions based off of visuals or creatives that were seen on page that you link to in a BigQuery table, because you know that custom dimension key means they saw this, which you have linked to an AutoML descriptor table. And the paths can go deeper and deeper, and there's infinite creativity in that. Really, the core answer to that is, what problem are you trying to solve? And it can probably solve it. It's just, if you're able to model it with AutoML, and if not, there's probably, given you have enough data, is always the key. You should be able to find the solution you're looking for.
Thanks, Pam and Tyler. And it just seems like there are quite a number of use cases for this. And speaking of which, what are the different, oh, sorry, I think there's some more questions coming through. Let me just go through those questions really quick. So Jonathan had a question where he says, the Google documentation on GA BigQuery schema is not great. I often find it hard to find good templates for interesting SQL queries to run on these data sets. Do you have any good tips or places to find some interesting queries?
Yes, I can start off with this one. So I do sympathize with you with trying to make sense of the documentation that's already out there regarding the schema. hundreds of fields, and if you're not in GA every day, it can be tricky to kind of get acclimated in there. The first resource that comes to mind, if you have not come across it yet, is the Google Analytics BigQuery Cookbook. And that's something that we can provide in the follow-ups from today's session, but they have created a guide of, it's about 50% very simple queries and then 50% more advanced use cases. So that is a resource I used quite a bit when I was getting started. And coming directly from Google itself, it was very helpful. I'm trying to think if there are any other good resources. To think. I'm kind of blanking on anything other than what Google has already provided in terms of their cookbooks, standard SQL documentation, as well as the schema itself. Anything I'm missing, team?
I wouldn't say you're missing anything, but if you're currently working with BigQuery or you've worked with it and you're frustrated, I will say that InfoTrust offers in-depth one-on-one trainings on this, and if you're interested, reach out. I think just setting up one training, which would be reasonable, would probably clarify any specific really deep questions. Obviously, we're here to answer your questions, but the limit into where we can talk about your case specifically, is a little cut up, where we do offer good trainings around that. So if you're interested, please feel free to reach out.
Yeah, and just to build on that a second, I do some of those trainings, and one of the areas that I see being particularly challenging for marketing teams, or even sometimes more like data science or BI teams who are getting started, is to really work with the GA data in BigQuery, you need to understand the Google Analytics tracking model. And so there are just some details there that maybe you just wouldn't know unless you're a kind of a power, I don't want to say a power user, but unless you're really familiar with GA and how the data collection works. And like I had kind of talked about attribution before, and understanding that all of the data you're seeing in GA is subject to the attribution model, and just being able to understand that those components of the tracking model, I think is really important. And I think is also kind of what you're getting at, Jonathan, is that not all that's really documented very well in there around, like, how do sessions time out and kind of those peculiarities that once you're in the data and really looking at it crop up, and you're kind of left with a lot of questions. So that is something we can help with if you want to reach out.
Okay, so it looks like we've cleared the queue, but if we circle way back to where we jumped into the online questions, I think the last thing that Shasnika had asked me is, why does it make sense to store your analytical data in the cloud? That is a transition from the way we did things 20 years ago. I imagine most of you in your life have seen a server rack where you have this giant, crazy looking machine room with fans, and it has to be so cold, and all these engineers are running it. For a long time, everybody was, that's what DevOps engineers were born out of, is just the concept of being able to maintain these giant servers and keep the services running and make sure our data is parallel and backed up in all these places, and all the problems that it comes with storing that amount of data and the processing involved with it and the networking involved with that. And all of that goes away when it becomes a service in the cloud. So Google is going to guarantee redundancy on your data. It's stored in multiple places so that if anything ever happens, there's backups of that data. It's not going to go down. It's stored cheaper. You don't have to pay to keep the servers running. They minimize downtime. So it's not something where you have to have an entire engineering team running. You can store it just as cheaply as if you were to buy those things on your own. And yet it's a service in the cloud. So moving away from that, it's honestly the best possible scenario for moving into the future of that. Plus, while we've mostly talked about BigQuery, the other concept is computation of that data. And sometimes you're not just running queries, you need to do processing with other languages. When you step into the cloud, just the strategy of moving your data into the cloud comes with all the other things like data streams, heuristical platforms that help fix errors in your data, computational platforms like cloud functions, or just what the concept of serverless functions, which you can think of as a timeshare for processors. So it's a lot cheaper, and you're only allowed to rent that timeshare for 10 minutes at a time, but can scale infinitely, and it's extremely cheap. So you get into a world where that server rack that you once had to maintain and have an entire engineering team to run is not only now being serviced completely as a platform without any team needing to run it, but we've gotten a lot more clever about how we use that massive timeshare, if you will, of all of these computers so that we can do it efficiently and cheaply. So it's actually cheaper to run even than just the hardware that it was previously sitting on-prem, if you say on premises, but on-prem. That's all I have to say about that.
Thanks, Tyler. Thanks for circling back to that. And I think, like, generally from some of the questions that we're seeing, I think overall users just want to understand, like, where can they actually go for more resources, which you and Pam have already kind of touched on. But also, like, in terms of just understanding how to get things started, how do you get started with BigQuery, and what are the how do you get started for analytics, and what are the skill sets you need to have? Is there any key points that you could add that could be helpful for people on this call today?
I can start. So I think, when I look at how to get started, on one hand, it's, how do I set up the link between my Google Analytics and BigQuery? Because as we've mentioned a couple times now, that's often the gateway for marketers to get into cloud, is by having their analytics data in BigQuery. So that's certainly one piece of the puzzle. But I think thinking about it more broadly, it's, what are the skills that my team needs to have to really be able to make use of this? And so to answer that question, one of the things that I really like about working in BigQuery from an analyst perspective is that you write your queries in Google's a dialect of SQL. They call it standard SQL. The reason I call that out is because if your analysts are already familiar with SQL, they'll pick up Google's dialect of it really quickly. So yes, to be able to write your queries, you do need to have some familiarity with SQL, but if you already do from having worked with other tools, you should be able to get up and running pretty quickly with that. The other thing I'll say in terms of resources, of course, Google has stuff, but Coursera, if you're familiar with that, they have a number of courses that can help you learn different capabilities within cloud. So actually for preparing for one of the Google Cloud certifications, they have you go through a number of the courses, and they do cover BigQuery as well as other products within Google Cloud. So that's another option as well, and it has some hands-on exercises. So in addition to just what you might find through Google Help, there are also Coursera courses on cloud that can give you a little more hands-on experience. Anything to add, Tyler or David?
As far as the cloud, I think you covered at least for your area. The one thing that I'll throw in that maybe could add some value, I imagine most people on here are coming from an analytics marketing analysis kind of perspective. However, you have developers on your team, and you might want to farm out your own little Tyler. I'll just say, when I went to learn about a lot of this, obviously Google's place number one for telling me about their products, but typically courses are some of the best ways to learn things. I used A Cloud Guru is the website that I use to lengthen my knowledge on the for the Google Cloud Architect exam, and to just learn these things a little bit deeper. The other big thing is, depending on courses and meetups, and Google might have meetups in your city. There's cloud meetups at various places. These will often not only come with tutorials for the thing that you came with. So if you're going to a Google Cloud meetup, which we've InfoTrust, if you're in Cincinnati, we host Google Cloud meetups. If you go to a Google Cloud meetup, not only will they have a platform that day that you're going through. So you might do a BigQuery thing and you'll actually have a token where you get like a free use for this amount of data to go through this platform and do this thing. So oftentimes you can get tokens for other things as well and like actually go in and walk through those things. So there's resources out there and meetups that actually, if your engineers are interested in getting started or you're interested in learning, I would suggest looking in your area for meetups, because a lot of times those will come with nice tutorial walkthroughs with a specific use case.
Yeah, I want to add to that the tutorials you're referring to are the Google Quick Labs. And they do often give free credits for that. Otherwise, it does cost a little bit of money. But they are really nice, self-contained, independent labs that are designed to get you through them in about an hour. And you get some good basic concepts of everything. And they do get pretty detailed and granular. So they're an excellent resource.
And we have a question coming through from Jonathan, which is, how long before I can click one button and get a predicted customer lifetime model based on my GA data?
I could take this question, Jonathan. So I suppose it comes down to how well you want your model to work. So customer lifetime value modeling is something that my team does. And there are different ways you can do it. So in terms of, how long, it would depend on kind of, making sure that you have enough data and what type of modeling approach you want to use here. Some of them are more complex than others. But I'm trying to think. I mean, as far as I know, I guess a couple things to say. Google Analytics, as I imagine you might know, does not have predicted customer lifetime value available out of the box right now. So it is something you have to model outside of GA. You could use Google Cloud for that. But when we do it, we follow the best practices of a modeling process. So it does take some time. We make sure that our data fits the assumptions of the model we want to use. We go through and fit a handful of models, validate them, iterate on them to find the one that fits the data best. So it's hard to give like a long, how long is this going to take? But it really comes down to, how much do you want to iterate on and improve the model that you have before you call it good enough? So feel free to ask me a follow-up question on that if that you would like.
To piggyback on what Pam was saying, so given that, while I'm not usually Pam is the one that does the modeling, I'm usually one of the integration engineers, or at least architecting around what it would look like to put this in an automated fashion. So there's first pass of getting the data in some format, figuring out models that work, and then deploying it. And then there's second pass of, okay, how do we get that data fed in a way that happens in which the frequency we want it to happen happens. And once you have the data connected in that way, how do we pass it through the model in an automated way that we know it'll get, we can run tests against it, make sure that we got the correct results, and then how do we deploy it in an automated way? So solvable problem. InfoTrust does solve those problems. How long until Google puts it in their cloud or Google Analytics? Not sure. But in the meantime, that's definitely something that we do, and it is entirely possible.
Okay, I guess in terms of questions, if there aren't any further questions, I just want to end off with just one last question for myself, which is for all three of you, David, Pam, and Tyler, which is what are the key trends that you guys are seeing when it comes to using the Google Cloud platforms for analytics? Maybe we can start off with Pam.
Sure. So I can tell you the things that come to mind right off the top of my head, and I kind of already, a couple of them have already been mentioned. We are seeing a lot of momentum when it comes to the machine learning capabilities within cloud. So whether that's AutoML or building your own custom models, I don't see that going away, to kind of put it bluntly. And then the other trend that we're seeing quite a bit, and Tyler can speak to this more, is this idea of a single view of the customer. So there are so many different tools and platforms that the typical marketing team needs to engage with on a regular basis. And they all have their own disparate data sources. They all are calculating things differently, looking at users differently. It's really hard to make sense of it all. And so we're seeing kind of a growing interest and also just impact from these projects that help integrate across those different data sources to provide a single view of the customer, to just understand them more holistically. So I would say those are the two from my end, ML, machine learning, as well as a single view of customer.
It's I can approach this, but I'm not sure that my answer is so utterly interesting. Like I said at the beginning of the call, my team is integration. So what we do is we make data talk to each other, and a large portion of my job is either finding out platforms that have no connected ID and getting a connected ID, which sometimes is JavaScript tagging and sometimes a cloud problem in which we stand something up. And then the other is data warehouses, data lakes, and making them happen, whether it's doing something from within the data lake to get the data to talk, or just getting the data into the data lake and just integrating the services together. While I'll say those aren't necessarily new concepts of what we've been talking about, the top of mind or the thing that people are turning to is data completion. We've had, if I look at the world of data collection, we were in a state probably 4 or 5 years ago. I think the majority of the market was like, how do we collect? How do we get to the next step? How do we get this data? How do I get this marketing data? How do I get my CRM integrated? Everybody's minds were kind of there. And now I'm seeing an industry shift to like, all right, figured out that problem, went through 3 or 4 vendors, figured out what worked for me, did this thing. And now everyone's like, well, we got all this. What do we do with it? Step one is get it all complete and talking to each other. So the thing that I'm seeing sort of top of mind in the industry right now is, if we haven't collected the right data, how do we get there quick? And then for those that have solved that problem, how do we get data completion? And then from there, the goal would be data scientists, A/B testing, whatever is your industry problem, figuring out how to make that data finally start to serve its value and its purpose once you have that complete set. And just laying dashboards on top of it once it's complete, and just being able to see everything holistically and in a kind of compiled way.
So I have one thing I want to add to all that. Everything that Pam and Tyler said, I agree with 100% because I'm exposed to many of the same projects that they are. But the one thing that I want to add on top of that we're seeing recently was with the current state of the world with COVID and everything going on. We are starting to see a little bit more interest from people in trying to measure what changes are going on in their analytics and their data, specifically around their e-commerce, so that they can proactively start making changes to address losses or increase places that are accelerating right now, because those do exist in our market today. So that is a very recent shift that I'm starting to see. We're starting to get some inquiries, and we're starting to help some of our clients with those types of solutions as well.
Another thing I'll jump on the back of there. It doesn't necessarily have to do with COVID, but state of the world 100%. The GDPR and CCPA and what is inevitably going to be a worldwide privacy thing. It's just a matter of time. We see the trend that data and privacy and compliance and liability for the data that you have is becoming increasingly a large topic in this space. And I think at least everybody's at least got an eye on it at this point. Google is definitely doing a great job of helping out in cloud and in other ways for those types of services. Also, we are specifically well positioned for that. InfoTrust has a product called Tag Inspector, which will audit an entire site, tell you what tags are collecting what data, what's collecting what it shouldn't, what tags shouldn't be firing, what tags shouldn't be firing, just generally does that entire space, in which we're finding ways to join that data with actual data in BigQuery to find more value. So that's one specific place that we're looking, but that is definitely an industry topic on what everybody's leaning to, different cloud services to solve the GDPR CCPA problem.
Hey, Tyler, one other thing that you could speak to real quick. Not sure if Ads Data Hub technically counts as cloud, but we're definitely seeing a lot of excitement and interest when it comes to Ads Data Hub.
It's 100% cloud. I'll give you the idea of Ads Data Hub as we're closing out here, just what it is if you're unaware. So we've talked earlier about Google Analytics and its connection to BigQuery. I want you to think of your entire Google-owned ad space as the same thing. So whether you're talking Google Ads, Campaign Manager data, DV360, your entire Google ad space, if you're running YouTube ads, whatever it is, the Ads Data Hub does kind of two separate things, but we talk about it as one product. It's ETL for all of those, basically the same way that you set up Google Analytics 360 through a form. You're going to be able to connect and get that advertising data into BigQuery, which is awesome. And also beyond what you could do with the APIs, some of those tables have actually extra data that you can only get by connecting through Ads Data Hub. So it's just a straight up advantage. Now, outside of that, that's already good. Get that data talking to the rest of your data, collect everything. That is just good in itself. It's obviously holds interest. It also has this concept called a clean room. And this is where I said Google's doing a great job of covering GDPR and CCPA and other compliance things. So Google's always had the concept of being able to, through Google Audiences and I forget the name of it, but they have different APIs to help identify audiences. But one of the things they're trying to do for finding audiences and basically creating new segments from the data that you have without breaking GDPR rules is they have their own user list of who's complied to what and who has this own Google managed table of different IDs and things that are some joined in your set and some joined in another set. And what Google's done is given you the concept of a clean room in which you can query into their own tables that you cannot see and you cannot interact with, but you can query against them. And the only thing that will be returned are IDs to be activated in segments. So what it allows you to do is use your own data sets and actually run analysis against Google data that you previously wouldn't have access to. And all you're getting back are those IDs. Now, because of this, those IDs have to be in groups of 50 or more because you don't want to be able to single out somebody by running a query that gets down to one person, and then that would break GDPR compliance. So by making these aggregations or these cross queries into Google's own private event level data, you are able to get large groups of segments for people based off of different analysis or different cross queries between different platforms and different advertising use cases, and still get those segments out without breaking any GDPR compliance. So it's good in the sense of it's giving you more data to interact with and more data to analyze in your ads, and also taking a step towards compliance. So it checks a lot of those boxes and gives you the ETL out of the solution. It seems like an obvious win case for a lot of companies that I'm looking at. And I think that's why it's getting tread. So yeah, that's something to definitely keep an eye out for.
Thanks everyone. Thanks Tyler. Seems like Ads Data Hub sounds like we need more time to talk about that in more detail. Sounds like another topic for another office hours session. And just real quickly, I think from Jonathan, he wanted to understand if it's available for anyone and the cost. Is there something that you could just mention really quickly about that?
I'm actually not 100% positive what the costs are. For the clients that I've worked with, they've actually dealt with Google directly for the setup, and then I've worked with them through that, and as well as anything that I've interacted has been set up before I've gotten in there. So I'm not 100% on the cost, but we can follow up with you for that info.
Okay, perfect. Thanks, Tyler. And thank you for the team of experts here at InfoTrust. As you can all probably see, everyone's really passionate about this specific topic, and we can probably talk for another hour about this. But unfortunately, we have to conclude this session today. And thank you for our attendees for asking such really great questions. If you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to us directly, and we will definitely be able to share more information, especially some of the key things that we had touched on earlier on this session. And with that, I just want to say thank you again, and that concludes our session.